Hello and welcome to this episode of Macro Sutra. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor at ThePrint. And now Donald Trump, the US President, has asked his US Trade Representative to look into various ways that the US can impose reciprocal tariffs on all of its trading partners. And this, of course, includes India. We're a big trading partner with the US. So, how does this affect us? Which are the sectors that are going to feel most of the pain? Which are the sectors that are not going to feel the pain? And what can India do to mitigate this? To discuss all of that, we have with you Radhika Pandey, Associate Professor at NIPFP. Thank you so much, Radhika, for joining us.
Thank you, Sharad.
So, now, Radhika, before we get into what India can do, how it will be affected, and all of that, let's look at why Donald Trump is fixating so much on tariffs. What is the issue?
Yeah, so tariffs actually have become a key instrument of policy for tariffs for Donald Trump, mainly because he's trying to use tariffs to address multiple objectives. One of the objective is that the US is facing a trade deficit which has been rising over time, and for the year 2024, the US trade deficit overall. Trade deficit in goods has risen to US dollar 1 trillion. So it has
Right.
risen to more than $1 trillion. So that is one thing that he's trying to correct through the imposition of tariffs. It is arguable whether it can be done or not, but the objective is one to correct the imbalance, severe imbalance in trade, particularly with some of the countries where those countries enjoy a huge trade surplus with the US. That is one. Secondly, he's also trying to garner revenues, because that is also another unstated objective of tariffs. Because in a lot of his speeches, he says that we are not going to impose taxes on domestic citizens, but we will try to take money from foreign trading partners
Right.
and put them in the US Treasury. So the other objective seems to be to collect revenues, because on the one side, Trump has announced reduction of corporate taxes. So to offset the loss of revenue, another objective of imposition of tariff is to increase revenue. And the third is, especially for with some countries like Mexico and Canada, it is to curb illegal immigration and also illegal flow of drugs. So those are
Right.
some of the objectives that, but mainly it is due to the rising trade deficit, which has now ballooned to above $1 trillion, and that is something that needs to be corrected. And therefore, tariff is being used as an instrument, and we've seen a series of tariff announcements being made, reciprocal tariffs, before that sectoral tariffs, country specific tariffs, and so on.
Right, absolutely. And just a kind of a review, he announced tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Then he announced tariffs on steel and aluminum. Those are the sector specific ones. And now there's the announcement of looking into reciprocal tariffs on a country by country basis.
And latest is he has announced tariffs on pharmaceuticals and autos
Absolutely,
and
right.
semiconductor chips. So I think every day we'll see some of the other announcements being made. And from 2nd of April, most of the tariffs will get implemented.
Right. And so now coming to India, what does our trade surplus with the US look like? Has it been growing over the years?
Yes, so it has been growing, and if we look at the list of countries that have trade surplus with the US, India now features at number 10. So
Okay.
we have a trade surplus of around $45 billion with the US, meaning that our exports of goods exceed our import of goods by $45 billion. But this is very small if we compare with the kind of surplus that China enjoys with the US, which is $295 billion. So if we look at some of the major countries, some of the countries that have a huge trade surplus, those countries are China, Mexico, Canada, Vietnam, and so on. But India also, and in fact, for some of the commodities, US is a major trading partner for India, meaning US is a very big export market for some of the goods.
Right.
And therefore, when we delve deeper into commodity wise sectoral impact, we'll see that there the impact will be much greater. But on an aggregate basis, the trade deficit is $45 billion, US trade deficit with us, or our trade surplus with the US. And in rank ranking terms, we are at number 10. And notably, Thailand also has a similar trade deficit, which is $45.6 billion. The difference is that US imports more from us in level terms. So therefore, with the US, with Thailand also, the deficit is the same, but our value of imports, what US imports from us, is higher.
Right. Okay. And so now, if these reciprocal tariffs do come into place, what are the sectors that are most going to feel the pain in India?
Yeah, so for this we need to look deeper into the trade of various commodities, and which are the sectors where US is our major export partner. So first, at an aggregate level, US accounts for almost 19% of our total exports. We
Right.
are talking about goods, we are not talking about services here. And this share has been growing. So US is our major and growing trade partner.
Mhm.
And on an aggregate basis, US accounts for almost 19% of our total goods exports. But there are several commodity level or sectoral level variation, and to understand the impact, we look at two metrics. One metric is what is the share of US in the various commodity exports at a broader
Right.
level, and what is the share of that commodity in our export basket. Is it very strong? Is it very big enough to cause imbalance in our current account deficit? If those exports suffer because of the imposition of tariffs, is it going to hamper our balance of payments, or is it going to lead to a higher current account deficit? So these are the two metrics. Again, firstly, what is the share of the US in that particular sector, like pharmaceuticals or apparels or precious stones and so on, and what is the share of these sectors in our export basket?
Right.
So when we look at these two metrics, our analysis suggests that for some of the sectors, the US accounts for a big proportion, even more than one third of the total export of that commodity. For example, pharmaceuticals.
Of
In
course.
pharmaceuticals, generic drug accounts for, even US has a greater share in generic drugs. But even looking at pharmaceuticals as a whole, more than one third of our exports are cornered by the US. So now with the latest announcement, that is something which is going to impact the sector. But on the other side, we also have to see that India is providing low cost drugs to the US. Generic drugs.
Right.
So that is something that we need to see how this reciprocal tariffs will play out, because this is something which in the short run is going to escalate costs for the US households a lot.
Of course.
But if we just look at from the trade perspective, pharmaceutical is one sector which is going to be hit, and the other two three important sectors are, one is electronic goods, where again US share in the total exports of electronic goods, electrical machinery, has been increasing over time. So that is again one sector which will be impacted, and the other sectors are nuclear reactors and boilers, pharmaceuticals, and apparel. So why these sectors? Because firstly, the US accounts for more than 20% of the total export value of these particular sectors. And these sectors account for more than 5% of the overall India's exports.
5% each.
5% each,
Right.
not total, 5% each. So, for example, nuclear reactors and boilers, they have a share of more than 7%. So, each of these account for more than 5% of the total value of our exports. And therefore, if they are going to be impacted due to the imposition of tariffs, then it will hamper our balance of payments position as well. So, just looking at the US share in the overall export basket is one side of the story. We also have to see what is the importance of that commodity in our overall export profile. And when we align these two, we bring these two variables in conjunction, then we can single out that there are these 4 5 sectors, as I said: pharmaceuticals, electronic goods, chemicals, apparels, and nuclear reactors and boilers. These are the sectors that will be impacted due to tariffs. As far as metals are concerned, there is a a very important, interesting statistic which is released by the US Trade Administration.
Right.
And again, aluminium and steel. For metals, we know that US has imposed 25% tariff
Right.
on both aluminium and steel. Uh, this is a continuation of the 2018 tariff that they had imposed.
That Trump himself had
Trump
imposed.
himself had imposed, and
Right.
that time on aluminium the tariff was 10%, and now it has been increased to 25.
25.
So a very useful approach is to look at the share of India in the US imports of aluminium. And there we see that India is not a very big player in the US aluminium imports, meaning that we provide 3% of US aluminium imports. We are
I see.
supplying
So that sector in India is unlikely to face such a big hit.
such a big hit,
Yeah.
yes. So countries like Canada. So aluminium, if we look at the import profile of aluminium, if we look at there, it is concentrated in Canada because Canada provides 42% of the total imports of supply of aluminium to the US.
Right.
So they are likely to be impacted. India, from the US perspective, India is not a very big player. India is the sixth largest supplier because Canada, Mexico, these countries are major suppliers. So India provides 3% of the total supply of imports to the US. And when we talk about steel, it is still lower, it's just 1.5%. So
Okay.
from the US perspective, India is not a very big player. But yes, from India's perspective, US is a big player because US accounts for 12% of our exports. So these two things have to be
Oh, so
seen in
then
conjunction.
the tariffs might actually impact these sectors.
Impact aluminium, not so much
Steel,
steel,
but
but
aluminum.
aluminium, because we are exporting 12% of our total exports of aluminium goes to
The
US.
US. I
Yes, so
see.
it's very important to look at these two things, that from the US perspective, how big is the Indian market? And from our perspective, how important is the US market for our exports of aluminium? So these
Right.
two things have to be seen in conjunction. But yes, for aluminium, there will be an impact, not so much for steel, but there will be indirect impact, which we are already seeing in the form of dumping that we're already seeing from China.
China.
And that threat may get escalated because now more countries will try to divert their exports to India.
So, okay, so then what are some of the sectors that are likely to be resilient against the imposition of reciprocal tariffs?
So the sectors where US is not a very major player, for example, within the services, what we can do is now, because there will be reciprocal tariffs, there will be great scope for trade deals. What will be important is to try to get a greater share in services exports, because that is something that
Right.
US will not mind, but this is something that will be great for us from our balance of payments perspective. Even the latest trade data shows that now services exports have surpassed goods exports
Yes, in absolute
in
value.
absolute value.
Right.
So now the strategy needs to change. Rather than having a tariff to tariff negotiation or falling in this tariff to tariff trap, which will not be useful for us, because we have a trade surplus with the US. We are not sourcing so many exportable commodities from the US that we have the scope for imposition of retaliatory tariffs. That won't work for us. So what
Right.
is important is that we try to take more scope, we try to take more access towards services, we try to take more access so that we can expand the GCC sector, our global capability centers, and that is something that will boost the profitability of US companies and will be also helpful for our surplus in services trade, which will kind of offset the trade in goods. So services, I think, is one sector which will be resilient to the tariffs, which can actually do better going forward if we play strategically, if we try to negotiate in such a way that we open up, we have asked for greater access for the services market.
Absolutely. And now this is the impact on India. But these tariffs, of course, are also going to have an impact on the US economy.
Correct.
So, what are some of those impacts?
Yeah, so this is very important because all the discussion is around the impact that the US trading partners are going to feel due to the imposition of tariffs. But we need to look a step back and look at the implications for the US economy, which are actually already started playing out. Because we've seen that again, US inflation has started to inch up. We saw last year that the Federal Reserve announced a cut in interest rates twice.
Right.
But now it is very unlikely going forward that the US Federal Reserve would cut interest rates. They may well have to increase interest rates going forward because inflation has started to inch up, and there are these various empirical estimates which suggest that just the imposition of 10% tariff on China and 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada. Of course, right now it is halted, but if it is implemented, that itself will lead to increase in the consumer inflation by 0.6 to 0.8%,
Right.
because that will lead to increase in the prices, and then prices as markup producers will pass on the impact to consumers. So there will be increase in consumer price inflation. That is one. The second is that because the Federal Reserve will not be in a position to cut interest rates and may raise interest rates, it will increase the cost of borrowings.
Right.
And the third important thing, which is currently not being discussed too much, is that it was good that US was having a trade deficit. In fact, we were using some of the surplus dollars to invest in the US T-bills.
Mm.
In fact, emerging markets were kind of subsidizing the US debt by investing in US T-bill. There was
Right.
a great demand for investments in US Treasury securities, and that was keeping the interest rates low. Now we could see interest rates rise. Firstly, because of Federal Reserve keeping keeping a more tight monetary policy, and on the other side, we the emerging markets not being forthcoming to invest in the UST bills. So these two factors together could lead to escalation in the cost of borrowing. But again, all these will have. It's not that again it will not have impact on emerging economies, because dollar will rise. Whatever
Of
we
course.
discussed in the previous episodes, dollar will get a push due to this. Other currencies will suffer. Those countries that have borrowed in US dollar, their debt costs will rise.
Will
There will be
rise.
series of defaults. So overall, not a very good picture glow for the US economy, for the trading partners, as well as for the global order as such, for the international debt position, and so on.
Okay, so now we have a few questions from the audience. Saurav asks, can enhancements to the PLI scheme offset the impact of Trump tariffs?
Now, here we have to understand two things. First, when we talk about reciprocal tariffs, and they have formulated a plan which is called a fair and reciprocal plan,
Right.
where the U.S. officials will try to, impose an equivalent amount of tariff, taking into account the tariffs, non-tariff barriers, and other subsidies which U.S.'s trading partners are providing. So it's not just tariff, they will look at various other restrictions that is hindering the competitiveness of the US industries.
Hmm.
So, and in that case, PLI could also count as a subsidy because we are providing some kind of government
Right.
intervention.
In which case the tariff might even be higher.
Yes, so it
Right.
may prove to be counterproductive to rely too much on PLIs, because if we look at the negotiations on the India EU trade, one of the stumbling blocks there is that we provide minimum support prices to our farmers, and that is something which is considered as subsidy by them. That
Yes.
is considered as uncompetitive behavior by them. So all these things will need to be taken into consideration. And the second point here is that PLIs were formulated to improve our exports, to diversify our exports. But if there is going to be tariffs on exports, then I don't think how PLI would help it further. And thirdly, as a standalone PLI scheme, we have seen that overall disbursements have been much lower than the budgeted amount.
Only I think
Only
electronics.
electronics,
Yeah.
only electronics have gained, and there also a particular uh, company has gained. So overall, the effectiveness of PLI schemes first need to be analyzed before applying PLI scheme as a counter to mitigate the impact of tariffs.
No, absolutely. And Anubhav asks, Can reducing tariffs be even beneficial for some Indian industries in the long run? What will be the impact of tariffs on the IT industry? Will it lead to the reduction of work for Indian IT companies?
So if we broadly look at IT, if we semiconductors are also part of the IT landscape. There we have seen that yesterday Trump announced going forward possible imposition of tariffs on semiconductors.
Right.
Now that will not have a substantial impact on India, at least in the short term, because again we are a very small player.
Yeah.
It will impact countries like Taiwan, South Korea, where they are the major players in the semiconductor industry. That is number one. And second, as I pointed out earlier, that there, it's all about now strategizing in such a way that services try to we gain in our IT services by trying to get greater access by leveraging our skill in the global capability center, so that we are able to correct the trade deficit that may increase in the goods front by having more access to the global capability center. So that is something that we need to see. So as of now, services sector doesn't seem to be something which will face the wrath of tariffs. It is mostly pharmaceuticals, aluminium, electrical machinery, nuclear boilers, apparels, if tariffs are imposed. So there are these 4, 5, 6 sectors where the share of US is much higher than 20% of our total exports of that sector. And also those sectors play a pivotal role in our export basket.
Right.
So those will have an impact. But going forward, there are various ways to mitigate the impact, and there a greater access to services trade, greater accesses to markets in the services arena can help in mitigating the impact.
Great. So, well, that's what we have for you. Basically, nobody really seems to be gaining from Donald Trump's reciprocal tariffs. It's going to, of course, hurt several key sectors in India, which Radhika has already pointed out. But it's also going to hurt the US in terms of inflation and rising debt costs, which themselves will then play out in emerging markets and other markets that are, that depend on the US economy quite a lot. So overall, there's not much to be gained from these tariffs, but Donald Trump is going ahead with them. So India has to figure out a way to mitigate the damage, and one way to do that is to focus much more on services exports. And recently, the data shows that services exports have exceeded merchandise exports in absolute quantities. So there is certainly demand for it. So India should try to leverage that. But on that note, that's all from us. Thank you so much for watching.